Accutron watches present The Accutron Show, a time travel through American culture, with your hosts David Graver and Indrani. Visit AccutronWatch.com and discover the brand that has made American history with an all-new proprietary next-generation electrostatic energy movement. Accutron. It's not a timepiece, it's a conversation piece.
I cook for me, and I cook for, I don't cook for critics. I cook for me, and I cook for my guests that come in.
The person you heard at the top of the show is today's guest, Angie Mar, acclaimed American chef and restaurateur. But first up, my co-host Indrani and me, David Graver, on a new episode of The Accutron Show. Stay tuned.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our iconic SpaceView 2020 collection, recreating the stunning visual impact of the original open dial design, combined with an all-new electrostatic energy movement. Time just changed. Again. The Accutron SpaceView 2020.
Here we are for a new episode of The Accutron Show. Indrani, you're actually joining us remotely from London. What brings you to London right now?
I have been speaking all over the place about climate and biodiversity and how brands can be part of this new green transformation. So I was speaking in London, headed to Germany, but my heart is still back with you, David. Miss you guys.
I'm so happy that you can join us, or that we are together right now, because today's guest, Angie Mar, is very close to my heart. I actually met her a few weeks before we all shut down for the pandemic in 2020, thanks to a previous Accutron Show guest, Daniel Balloon. And we dined together, and I knew there was something different about her, and the way she approached food just wasn't the same as everyone else around us. And I left feeling like this chef is the future of food. And I think we've got a good show ahead of us with some fun things to talk about. Do you have a favorite restaurant out there somewhere?
So many great restaurants. I'm really excited about regenerative agriculture and the new kinds of organic farm to table restaurants out here in Europe.
It's very important where we're looking to source our ingredients, and not just the flavors in front of us, but the ethical nature of the food that's before us. I think you would definitely agree that that's something that everyone now is starting to be conscious of and needs to be conscious of as we move forward, and not just fine dining, but all dining.
Yeah, and it just tastes so great when your food is sourced from healthy ground, healthy soil, and so it's exciting to see how chefs bring together the best of what our planet's abundance has to offer.
I'm also really curious to hear from Angie what it's like being a serial restaurateur and opening up multiple restaurants in New York City, which seems like such, for lack of a better word, a very cutthroat culinary environment where restaurants are turning over rapidly. And she's definitely demonstrated longevity, and I think there must be a key to that, and I'm interested in learning what could be the anchor to her success so far.
Yeah, I think Angie's amazing, and she's one of very few female restaurateurs that have had real success. And when women are so integrated in cooking in their homes, and yet in the professional world, women often seem to be in the shadows in the restaurant scene. So it's really exciting to shine a spotlight on Angie, who's just doing such extraordinary culinary work.
I definitely agree. And honestly, I can't wait to hear what Angie Mar has to say on this episode of The Accutron Show. Stay tuned.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our Accutron DNA collection. Reimagined for a new generation, the Accutron DNA combines breakthrough technology, precise engineering, and modern aesthetics to achieve a new level of technical excellence. The Accutron DNA, the new face of time for those who blaze new trails.
Angie, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to start, like how I sometimes start, by being a little bit of a fanboy. I have had the great privilege of eating in 2 of your restaurants and having experiences that were really game-changing, where you played with flavor and texture in a way that I hadn't experienced in any other restaurant in New York City. I want to begin, though, by asking how you came to know a previous guest of ours, Chef Daniel Blue, who is actually how we met at Sunday Supper in 2020.
It's amazing. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I am just thrilled to be sitting with you. And I feel like, yes, you've experienced some really great meals, and we've experienced some really wonderful interactions together through food, which is always really lovely. But, I met Danielle, I think we had crossed paths multiple times. When I was kind of coming up, and Danielle was already Danielle, right? Yeah. But I was actually writing my book, Butcher and Beast, Mastering the Art of Meat. And I was really, really adamant. If you look through the book, which if you don't have a copy, I've got to get you one.
Oh, I do have a copy.
Okay, great. So, there is that section where it's just like 14 pages of just like New York icons eating burgers, right? Eating like the original Beatrice burger. And I thought, we have to call Danielle. I was like, Danielle's perfect for this. We have to call him. And so I didn't have his number at the time because we didn't know each other that well, but I got a hold of his assistant, and I was like, I know this is a long shot. I know Danielle's super busy, but I'm writing this cookbook and we're doing this photo shoot, and I would love to have Danielle in it. And she immediately, within like 5 minutes, was like, Danielle says yes, he would love to do it. He'll be there. Let us know what time. And, we've been friends ever since.
I love that very much.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think that collaborations in such a cutthroat world as the New York culinary scene, it's not what we'd expect to hear. And it's really heartwarming to hear
it's
that.
really interesting because, yes, is New York cutthroat? Absolutely. And I think that the culinary scene is extremely competitive. But I think among the upper echelon of restaurants, where you talk about fine dining and, really the chefs that are leading the way, it is not cutthroat, and it's actually tremendously supportive and wonderful. And, I have been so lucky throughout the years, especially as I've, kind of gone into more of the fine dining route in the past 3-4 years, to have had the support of, wonderful people like Danielle, like Gabriel Kuther, like Thomas Keller, Jonathan Beno, JG, all of these really, huge titans of the industry have just been so incredibly supportive of my business, of my, my cuisine, and it is something that I'm so thankful for. So I think that there's a difference when we talk about competitiveness and cutthroat. I think
Yes.
it absolutely exists, but I think that there's a huge camaraderie among the fine dining community. And by the way, I cannot forget Eric Repair. I was remiss in not mentioning his name. He has been extremely supportive as well.
Having had some absolutely remarkable and mind-blowing meals with you, I'm curious if you can take us back in time along your food journey, because when I take a bite out of something that you have imagined, I feel so much across space and time.
Thank you. That's a huge, huge compliment, and I really appreciate that. My food journey is really different. I fell in love with fine dining when I was 8 years old. The very first fine dining restaurant I went into ever was Canless in Seattle. I'm from Seattle. And my family and the Canless family have a long history. They opened their restaurants, in Seattle the same year in 1947. And Canless has been around ever since. So, I really grew up going to that restaurant. It's part of my, just my history, and somewhere that I love to go. But, I was 8 years old and I went there, and I actually got 86th from the restaurant. I was 8 and I got like thrown out of the restaurant, not by them, by my father, because I had like misbehaved or something. I think I like blew bubbles in my Shirley Temple. I was like really bad. I was an unruly child then. But, I got exiled to the car and I got put on timeout and I was really upset. And I remembered thinking like, okay, I'm going to go back into this restaurant. I'm going to make it back in there one day and I'm never going to leave. Like, I deserve to be there. And it didn't matter, right? And I think it was that, me being kind of that like contrarian, being like, well, you tell me I can't be here, so I have to be here, right? And so when my dad finally came to get me, we went back into the restaurant and I was like really like very well behaved and I sat in my chair and they laid the napkin over my lap and they said, Miss Mar, welcome back. Would you like another Shirley Temple? And that was like, I think the minute that I fell in love with fine dining and really wonderful hospitality.
That's really remarkable.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you if you could share the origin of your passion for food.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a restaurant family. So for me, it is, it's just a way of life, right? I love food and I grew up in a very, very diverse neighborhood. So, I grew up eating all different kinds of cuisines, experiencing all different kinds of cultures, which I think was truly fundamental in developing my palate. And every day it's like there was something new. There was a new cuisine, there was a new dish. As a kid, I had like my favorite Ethiopian place down the block, and I would like, I had my favorite taco truck. I had my favorite, Chinese spot. I had my favorite Vietnamese spot. So it was like having exposure to a ton of different cultures and then also having a very international childhood, which I had, was incredibly impactful for me, because I grew up in Seattle, but I would spend spring break and summer in Hong Kong, Taipei, or London.
Wow.
So to have this like really diverse cuisine, both at home and then abroad, it's like, I just fell in love with food. I don't think there was any other choice.
Then how do you take this global influence and find a spot in the West Village and make the West Village your home?
Yeah. I think that, Eric Asimov, who's a Times wine critic, I met him maybe like 3 months after I'd moved to New York. And, I had him over to my place because we have mutual friends, and I had him over to my place for dinner, and he told me, New Yorkers are born every day all over the world. They just don't know they're New Yorkers yet.
I love that so much.
It's so good, right? And I've always carried that with me, like 20 years later. And for me, I think that there is no better place than in New York because it is so diverse and so wonderful. But I think that to answer your question, finding a spot in the West Village, it's uptown, it's downtown, the vibe of the restaurant is, right? And I think that to have this incredibly diverse food upbringing, it really reflects in my cuisine today because that's where, enter the continental cuisine, that is Libby.
Yes.
It's continental. It is, kind of a culmination of the flavors that I grew up with as a child, my Chinese heritage, as well as my French training. So, regardless of what the flavors are, everything is really executed in French technique, which is how I'm trained. So it's a great little restaurant.
I'm really curious about being a female entrepreneur, a female restaurateur, a woman who's doing such extraordinary work in the culinary industry, where there are very few women who've achieved that level of success that you have. Can you share a little bit more about, how is it different for a woman doing this work, and who have been some mentors who've helped you to to really see the possibilities.
Absolutely. It's really interesting. Throughout the beginning of my career, especially when I was at the Beatrice Inn and, doing more casual dining, I don't really think the Beatrice Inn was ever casual. It was always, I should rephrase that. But, not doing such fine dining, I think that my gender never really occurred to me. And I think earlier on in my career, if I go back over interviews, early on in my career, I used to say like, it doesn't matter, and I'm who I am, and it's, I haven't really had issues with it. And then I go into the more, fine dining realm, and like, as my career progressed, I actually realized that as my career progressed, it actually became very distinctly harder because I am a woman. And I really started to feel the pressure of how unfair it is, as a woman in the industry. With that all being said, some of my best mentors are actually men who have, recognized the talent, recognized the vision, and then supported it along the way. But there's also really wonderful women out there that I've been so lucky to forge friendships with. Dominique Crenn, I think, is absolutely amazing. I was just with her in Vegas for 50 Best last week, and she is just such a wonderful soul, always so uplifting. Elizabeth Blau of Blau and Associates in Las Vegas, who is just so committed to other women and the culinary industry. She's like truly, a titan of the industry. And, for me, it's like when I look at Elizabeth, it's like, gosh, she's like kind of behind the scenes, right? Because she's kind of like placing all these chefs everywhere. But she's like who I want to be when I grow up. She's amazing. And then, of course, people like Allison Park, who owns Bren Whiskey. She is incredible. I met her, almost, 15 years ago. And she was like, she's an ex-ballerina who stopped dancing and really invested everything that she had in making whiskey. And when I met her, she was, she was distributing herself. She was making deliveries by herself. And she grew it to this huge company in an arena that is primarily dominated by men, and then sold it. She's incredibly inspiring, and now she's a founder and also investor of, different businesses, and she's incredibly inspiring. So, I think to answer your question, it's only been later on in my career that I've really understood how hard it is for women. And I think, you see that, right? You see that in the lack of accolades that women get, the lack of representation that there are at some of the biggest culinary awards. And not all of them are like that. But, a lot of them are. Some of the biggest culinary awards, there's a huge lack of representation, and it's tremendously political. But I do think that also, on the brighter side, what it's done for me is understanding how hard it is for women in the industry. For me, it's now become a priority to invest in other women, invest in their futures, and really lift them up. Whether it's via mentoring, whether it's, giving them a platform, whether it's promoting the work that they're doing, it has become a huge priority for me to support other women in our industry.
You just mentioned awards, and I am acutely familiar with how important awards are to getting new people indoors to restaurants. Do you feel that way? Like there's a gravitas to awards. It's not just a title, it's actually about foot traffic.
Absolutely. It absolutely is about foot traffic. We live in this world now where it's very digital, right? So, look, the fact that I don't have a New York Times review for, either of my last two restaurants is kind of crazy.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, which I think we all know that. But, that's Pete's prerogative, so whatever. But look, having reviews, having critical reviews, having critical awards absolutely does drive foot traffic. It is very important, because, I remember the days where, you just had to cook great food. You just had to cook great food. And we live in a different world now. And, it very much is about, having different spotlights put on a restaurant in order for it to be successful, rather than just cooking really great food. But, we are very fortunate where, look, I mean, we might not have gotten we might not have been seen by some of the bigger, awards or publications just yet. But, we've earned 4 stars from Forbes, which we're very proud of. We just got the 6th best restaurant in the country from Rob Report. And, we're very thrilled about that. So I only can imagine that it is, the road to achieving other bigger things, which we're very thrilled about and excited about. But at the end of the day, and I've said it multiple times, I actually don't cook for awards. I cook for me, and I cook for, I don't cook for critics. I cook for me, and I cook for my guests that come in. And I think you can feel the soul, and you can feel the beauty and the vision that's on the plate, which, you've experienced a couple times, which I love.
Cooking for you, I think, also translates to cooking for your family. And one of the times I ate at Le Bee, I was next to your...
I think you were next to my nieces.
I was next to your nieces,
yeah.
who, as I was crying over your food, were also crying for different reasons because it was so personal to them.
Yeah.
How can you talk about infusing this personal element into your cuisine at Le Bee?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that cooking, is tremendously personal, and the act of cooking with someone is also tremendously personal. And, I just said this the other day. I was talking to my team about this, about how, you could work dinner service in the kitchen with somebody and learn more about their soul in that one night than you can learn about a person just having interactions with them for years, right? And I think that there's an element of when you cook for someone or you cook with someone, you're giving a little bit of yourself away, right? You're giving a little bit of your soul away, your passion away of who you are. And we try to do that all the time in the restaurant. But there's also a lot of work that goes into doing that because, yes, obviously, we knew you were coming in. We know what you like to eat. We know what you don't like to eat. We want to give you the best experience possible, right? But it's because we do the research. My nieces, it's I knew that, they wanted, I think they wanted pasta that night. And I think that it was I think they were oh, we kind of feel like pasta right now, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if we're going to come tonight because you don't make pasta. And I was okay, whatever. Just, you're my nieces. You come in and eat. But, we're going to go out of our way to make them pasta. But, we listen and we pay attention to what's being said at the table, not just to us, but to the guests, each other. And anytime we can do surprise courses or tailor a meal to someone, I had somebody the other day who had come into the restaurant and said, they were talking to their guest and they were oh, she used to have this restaurant called the Beatrice Inn, and it had the most amazing milk braised pork shoulder. And I loved that dish, and it was they couldn't describe it, and it was this whole thing. And we overheard that, somebody in the restaurant overheard that, and they said, "Hey, chef, they loved this dish that you used to make, and that dish happens to be something that I was making since I was 15 years old, right? Very personal to me." So I said, "You know what? I can make it happen." So we made it happen, and we sent it out as a surprise course. And just that small act, that small little gift, makes the world of difference in somebody's meal. And, if we can do little surprises like that or pay attention to little details like that, every single table, every single guest, it makes a world of difference. So whether you're coming in and, you're just sitting at the bar and having a little bite, or you're coming in and you're doing a 9-course tasting menu, it doesn't matter. We want to give you that element of personalization and give you a little bit of our soul with every single experience.
It's very powerful.
That's beautiful. I can't wait to come and try your cooking.
I can't wait to have you.
But I'd love to ask, can you explain the concepts of your restaurants and how you develop them?
Yeah. I never really, I guess I'm a little opposite in the fact that I don't have a big restaurant group. I've always been single owner. But really I conceive of the menu based on the space, you know? So when I had the Beatrice Inn, I bought that restaurant. It was like this underground space. It was 100 years old. It had this like sordid history. And so I wrote a menu for that space, right? This old chop house, because I think it's very important to pay homage to the history, especially we're talking about, this is New York City, right? Where it's like every building has, that history to it. And then when I did Le Trois Chevaux, for me, Le Trois Chevaux was really transformative because that was the first restaurant that I got to start from a blank slate, where it was, this is me, this is Le Trois Chevaux, and this is everything that, you never saw at the Beatrice because I was cooking for the Beatrice. Now this is me, And so, it's always very personal, but it always has to do with like the real estate and what does the real estate tell you? What is it, what does the neighborhood tell you? What really makes sense? And it also has to do a lot with, where I am in my life and what I'm inspired by now and, what I'm working on, right? What, all of the inspirations that I've collected. And how I want to communicate that to our guests. So it's a little bit of a different creative process, I suppose.
What about art? Art has factored into your restaurant. I mean, I walked in and I immediately observed that art and design were integral to the experiences of dining with you. Do you want to talk about the influence of art?
Yeah, for sure. Art plays such a huge role in my cuisine, in the design of the restaurants, and in, really just the way that I live my life, right? My grandfather was a very big collector, and we're very lucky to have several of his pieces in the restaurant today. But for me, I think that there's a very fascinating place where art and cuisine and fashion and theater and writing, there's a crossroads where all of these creative pursuits meet. And it's always been that way for me. So, back at the Beatrice, I very much was inspired by fashion, and I would look at, the runway shows for Dior, whether they were current or they were vintage. It didn't matter. I would look at collections, like actual collections, and I would say, okay, what does this look like? I think recently in the past, probably like 4 or 5 years, I've very much been inspired by surrealist art. So, we have a Leonore Fini in the restaurant and, works of Salvador Dali, who was actually himself a very accomplished cook. But the Schiaparelli, the archives of Schiaparelli, and also, what Daniel Roseberry is doing now, I think is tremendously inspiring, and it's so artful. And to find ways for, to be inspired by that and to then have things move onto the plate is tremendously interesting. But there's just so many crossroads where art and cuisine meet that I think are tremendously important. And I think, art is inspired by cuisine and cuisine is inspired by art. But they really go hand in hand. And, it really, at the end of the day, has to do with not just experiencing the arts, but really living well. Living well, living to be surrounded by very beautiful, inspiring things. And that's really all I've ever wanted, right? Yeah. It's just this life that's, where I can be surrounded by really beautiful, inspiring things, regardless of what they are.
That's very inspiring in itself, Angie. We'll be right back with Chef Angie Mar after a message from Accutron.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our legacy collection. reviving some of the most memorable Accutron watches from the 60s and 70s. The Legacy Collection combines timeless design with the technical excellence of Swiss watchmaking, each limited to 600 individually numbered pieces. The Accutron Legacy Collection, inspired by the past, built for your future.
Angie, I as an artist myself, hearing you describe your relationship between food and art and inspiration, it's inspiring me just talking about it. I know that eating a meal can so much influence one's whole state of being. And I'd love to ask you about sourcing ingredients, because I've been on a journey learning about biodiversity and regenerative agriculture and those influences on food. Can you tell us about how you source your ingredients?
So for me, it's really interesting because, when I was younger in my career, I would put like all these different things on a plate, right? And as my palate has matured and I've gone through, more of my career, I realized that it's really not about putting a bunch of things on the plate. It's about simplifying and putting only the very best ingredients on the plate and letting them shine. So for me, it's very much about getting the best ingredients, regardless of where in the world they're from, and really letting them shine. And, I think that there's I actually don't go to the farmer's market. I know that's like really odd for chefs to say, because I think a lot of chefs, especially in New York, they're at the farmer's market. But for me, it's like I like consistency and I like the best. So I work with a lot of different purveyors and farmers from all over the country and actually all over the world. I get tuna flown in from Japan because it's the best. My turbot, the one that you had that you love so much, that comes from Brittany because it's the best. The same thing with the Dover sole. It's from Brittany. But really for me, it truly is about sourcing the best ingredients and treating them respectfully and simply and letting them shine. I don't like to torture things too much to where they're like, you start with a turbot and you end up with something else, right? It's like, that when you order the turbot at my restaurant, it's a turbot and it's going to look like a turbot and it is going to be the best fish that you've had, and that's what's really important for me.
For New Yorkers who haven't been yet, and for people who are listening into this from elsewhere, if they show up to Libby, what can they expect? Can you walk us through the front door and into an experience?
Yeah. It's really interesting because I don't believe that there is such a thing as perfect. I think perfect is always a moving target. So, at Libby, we always talk about the idea of excellence and striving for excellence, right? And I know that we've hit excellence when people that come to Libby walk in, and it's happened multiple times, where they walk in and they say, the hospitality was so excellent here that I felt like from the second I walked in the door, I had purchased a $500 bottle of wine without having purchased the $500 bottle of wine. And that's really important to me because, I think that, you come in and the first person you see, we want you to be showered with hospitality, and I think that the idea, of overwhelming hospitality is tremendously important, especially this day and age, because if you look at a lot of restaurants, especially right now, I think especially post-COVID, and I don't want to blame COVID for everything because I think this was kind of happening before COVID, the idea of kind of like the gentrification of restaurants in New York City, where it became less niche, less like individual, and we really kind of started catering to this like bigger restaurant group, mass marketed, everything is the same. Like, you can get a beet salad and a branzino at any restaurant you go to in like the city, right?
Yes.
But having that idea of individuality and also catering the hospitality to individuality is something tremendously important. And for us, the striving of excellence, and also giving you something that you didn't even know that you needed before you even, or giving you something before you even knew you needed it. You know, that for me is great hospitality and what it's like to dine at Libby, you know, because we really do try to go the extra mile, always.
I love that.
What have been the biggest challenges for you in the business side of running a restaurant?
I think the business side of the restaurants, you know, the challenging thing is always, you know, it's staying relevant and innovation, right? That's not true. I should rephrase that. Innovation has never been the challenge. It is the constant changing in dining fads. That I think is very that's a new thing. That's like a new thing, I think, that I think we've seen in the last like 4 to 5 years of New York City dining, is the constant changing in dining fads. I mean, like, you know, you and I are like cut from the same cloth, right? We're very like classic and we like the new things, but we also like the classic stuff.
Indeed.
Right?
It's important to understand the classics to understand how innovation is innovation.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that, you know, and that's always been my ethos, right? But I think that that's probably one of the things that I think, as somebody who's now been in the industry for, you know, owned restaurants for 10 years, that has been, I think, the biggest change that I've seen, and probably one of the biggest challenges is, especially when we talk about, you know, the change in dining styles or dining fads, and what readers and diners are saying is trendy, is hard to keep up with, especially when the majority of the widely read food media caters to trends instead of actually looking at artistry, which are two different things. Artistry and trends are two completely different things. And I think that there's been less of an emphasis on actual artistry and vision and more of an emphasis on what is trendy. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Yeah. So I think that's been very different because it wasn't always like that, you know?
How do you feel about the sweeping need for there to be a burger on every menu at fine dining restaurants across the United States, the world even? The
world.
Burger is the thing.
It's like the thing, right? You know, I think that if you had asked me this question 3 years ago when I didn't have a burger, because, you know, when I opened up, so when I had the Beatrice Inn, I had the Beatrice burger, which clearly was a very important thing there because I have 14 pages dedicated to it in my book, right? But if you had asked me this 3 years ago when I was opening up the Trois Chevaux, I would have said to you, I've cooked thousands and thousands of burgers. I don't need to cook anymore. Like, it's fine. But you know what? Actually, now, so at Libby, I do 9 burgers a night. There is one for every bar stool and when they're gone, they're gone. Right. And actually, we have to have you in for that.
I want to do it so bad.
It just dawned on me. You haven't had that. Okay. So we have to have you in. That's the next thing. And when you're back, we have to have you in as well. But yes, so there's 1 burger a night per bar seat. And it's crazy because at 4:45, people are lining up outside the door to get a burger, which is wild to me. And it is the exact same burger that I've cooked since 2013. And it hasn't changed at all. It's the exact same recipe. But I think it's amazing, you know, and I actually just did, it's not out yet. I think it comes out later this summer, but I was very honored to have the privilege to do a masterclass on burgers. So I'm very, very thrilled about it, and it's really exciting. But honestly, the more when I was preparing for this masterclass, to get ready to film this masterclass, I was like, why burgers? And I really thought about it, and I was like, you know what? I think that out of all of the things that America has, burgers are the most American thing that we have, right? And they're also, a lot of people think of them as the ultimate economy cut, right? But I don't agree with that, because I think that they are, burgers are the economy of the ingredients that you put in them, right? Mine happen to be 45-day dry aged ribeye. So it's, they're delicious, right? But it's, it's very specific. And I think that burgers can be tailored. There's so many expressions of them. And I think that you're right. I think that, whereas 10 years ago it was a very American thing, it's like now it's a very global thing. And I suppose that if America has one giant impact on the global culinary scene, it's probably a burger.
I love it.
And I think it's very interesting to look at the New York scene and the way that it leads global culture from a culinary perspective as well. That's a really important part of how palates are formed now. Is people come to New York and they expect a certain level of extraordinariness in the food. What does it mean to you to, you've spoken about your diverse influences and backgrounds, and at the same time being quintessentially American?
I think that that's a really wonderful question, because, and especially in this time, that we're in, for me, I think to have a tremendously global background and also to be a daughter of immigrants, and to have, to be in New York, to be cooking, as an Asian woman, French trained, and cooking, essentially French cuisine, right? For all intents and purposes. For me, this is the most American thing that I could be, right? I think that that's really what it is. And I'm very proud of that.
That's the most magical answer I think we've received in the Accutron Show.
Thank you.
My last question for you can be answered two ways. Are you a local anywhere, or is there a dish that you tend to return to anywhere?
Yeah. I absolutely am a local at several places. It's really funny because a lot of people ask, they're always like, oh, Angie, have you gone to this new restaurant or this new restaurant? And I have to tell you guys, I'm really, really bad at that. I'm really bad at that. I have whenever I go to Paris, I have 5 restaurants I go to. When I go to Montreal, I have 3 restaurants I go to. So, and I'm the exact same way in New York. I have my locals that I go to, and I typically don't deviate. And on top of that, I also have very specific dishes that I order at every single place. And I don't deviate from it. And it's, I don't know. And you would think that, as a chef, you would think that it would be oh, we have to try new things, and everything is new, and everything is new. But I almost think that, and this is probably me breaking down the psychology of it, but I probably think that, because I'm experiencing new things all the time within my own kitchen, I like to step out of my kitchen and have something that I know is there, and I know it's comforting. So, for me, it is, lately I've been going to Claude. That's my newest addition to the rotation. And I go to Claude for the foie gras and the roast chicken. And then, of course, Le Bernardin, because it is by far and away, the best restaurant in New York. But I always have my exact same order there, which is the tuna and foie gras, and then the Dover sole, and then the mid-course I'll deviate sometimes, right? And then, of course, per se. I love going to per se. It's one of my favorite places in the city. I never eat in the dining room. I actually always eat in the lounge, and I always dine there by myself, which is, it's something that I love to do, and I'll do it like on a Sunday. And I sit in the lounge by myself and I eat. And then, of course, Gabriel Kuther. So, so for me, those are kind of
your spots.
My spots. Oh, one more. And Huiyuan, which is on East Broadway. And it's this Chinese restaurant, and it's incredible. You and I are going to go one time.
Yeah, we should.
I think we should go. Yeah,
Let's go.
We'll have to go. But it's, those are kind of like my locals, and that's really it. I wish I had a more exciting answer for you.
That's a good answer. That's a very good answer.
So thank you so much, Angie, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone. It's been a beautiful culinary journey, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on the Accutron Show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Accutron Show. To listen to all of our shows, visit accutronwatch.com. Remember to check out our special edition Accutron products in collaboration with La Paulina Cigars, Estabrook Pens, Aceline Publishing, and Stave Puzzles. To learn more about the world of Accutron, follow us on Instagram at Accutron Watch. From New York City, until next time, Accutron time. This is Bill McCuddy.